surface, for some mild versions of it, it's a version of affirmative action. And I haven't been in an institution in 60 years of teaching that didn't do affirmative action. It went way back into the 60s. And I participated in it in seminary and college. And that was kind of a soft affirmative action. Other things being equal, let's give the position to a black, or let's give the position to a woman if you needed to. Other things being equal. Harder versions, well, we're just going to take members of that category. But what's happening now is much more sophisticated than that. The DIA ideology of more sophisticated practitioners of it is reliant upon what is called cultural Marxism. Now, you all know Marx believed there was going to be a big revolution. You had the means of production, the capitalists and the poor working class, and then you had the relation of production, the power people at the top were the bourgeoisie, and they arranged the laws for their benefit, the culture for their benefit, and below them were the poor ones who had the opiate of religion that kept them kind of passive. But finally, Marx thought the immiserated masses would revolt. There would be a communist society forged by the masses. Never happened. Lenin comes along and says, well, there has to be an enlightened elite to lead the poor proletariat who are mesmerized by religion and other things. We need an enlightened elite to lead them. Guess who that was? The Communist Party. So the Bolshevik Revolution is carried on by the Communist Party, and a very primitive way it happens in Russia, it happens in a couple other places in the world, but it doesn't happen in the industrialized West, where it's supposed to happen. Germany, England, the United States, there aren't any revolutionary capacities. So some Marxist theories called cultural Marxists, I got to stand up a little bit, led by a guy called Gramsci in Italy, and in America by the New School of Social Research, especially by a guy called Herbert Marcuse, argued that, no, the revolution has to come from below, has to come culturally. You have to disrupt the culture. And if you disrupt the culture enough, it's going to be unstable and a revolution will happen. So the first thing you do is in the Marxist, in the cultural Marxism, in the DIA ideology is this way. Guess who has formed the normative culture that is oppressive to LGBTQ and oppressive to black people? Guess who has formed that culture which is oppressive and privileged? White, married, heterosexual males. And their consorts, white, heterosexual females, were mamas. And they have dominated the West and arranged all the rules and laws and norms for their interest. So what do we have to do in order to get LGBTQ into the inclusive society? We have to disrupt the normative vision that was shaped by the oppressor. And so you cast out the oppressor, put them marginalized, white males, no longer hire them. It's Orthodox white Christian males, they're no longer hired, so that you can be inclusive. You're not ever inclusive because you're excluding who were once the oppressors. So you're bringing in the oppressed, the LGBTQ, and you're bringing in blacks and privileging them in their viewpoint. But that hasn't settled out yet in any orderly way, so right now we're in the period of disruption. But we have to disrupt what's happening in order for the oppressed to get in. So what's happening in DIE as an ideology that's shaping and disrupting, and one part of the cultural Marxism is the settler colonist. Have you heard that language? Settler colonist, that's the argument against Israel. Israel is a settler colonist nation, doesn't deserve to be where, from the river to the sea, out with it. They're a settler colonial culture and they're oppressive. So no black and white, no nuance. I mean, it's all black and white, no nuance. Out they have to go. Hamas believes that, and how many student groups now are flying Hamas flags? Well, that's part of the DIE, is to disrupt things and disrupt the Western way of thinking, and it's happening in the universities. And even in a quiet little place like Roanoke College, there's a DIE vice president. And there probably hasn't been a white Orthodox Christian hired in the last 3 or 4 years. You hire quite different other people, and there's quite a ledger now of gay lesbian faculty. And they're mentors to students who are unsettled about their sexual identity. And most of them have come from Orthodox Christian backgrounds, and they guarantee searching students, upset students, that you can be a Christian and not adhere to Orthodox Christianity, but you can go the liberal way and be included. So even to a quiet place, and it's not a vicious kind of DIE, but it's really operating. And in a lot of elite schools, it's operating very powerfully. What's disturbing, to me at least, is it's operating in the government, big time. DIE, Governor Walz in Minnesota has put DIE in every office of Minnesota. And I read a sharp critique of FEMA as being very deeply involved in DIE, so that you're trying to bring in the oppressed and cast out the oppressor. And of course, that can really disrupt something like FEMA when it's needed very badly. So anyway, going into kind of a long excursus of cultural Marxism, but you really have to understand that, because that's behind the more sophisticated versions of diversity, inclusivity, and equity. So emergence of a very powerful, and along with that comes the emergence of a very powerful, well-funded organization. Look up the Human Rights Campaign sometime online. Look it up. And what's distressing is about every major corporation in America is a contributor to the Human Rights Campaign. And that's the one who keeps a scorecard on every corporation about how they live up to the LGBTQ standards and how inclusive they are and how much they take the DIE ideology seriously. So there's a very, very heavy threat, I think, of the disruption of Western Judeo-Christian culture from cultural Marxism in the DIE ideology. So some people, I wanted to say one other thing, and this often squelches public expression of classic Christian values on sexuality and marriage. And people like Rod Dreher, who's one of the more guys ringing the bell of alarm. I don't know if any of you read him. You might read him. It's interesting stuff. I don't go all the way with him. He's pretty pessimistic. But he thinks that not only will be driven from the public square, but they will come after you. That we're already in a soft totalitarian system in which the culture is pressing hard on Orthodox Christians to be quiet. Yeah.
I read him just a little bit. Doesn't he advocate the Benedict doctrine?
Yep. This is the guy that wrote the Benedict doctrine. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's him. And he's got a sequel book called Live Not by Lies. And he's going to have a new book coming out called Enchantment, where he ditches politics and believes we have to re-enchant our culture religiously. He was a Methodist, became a Catholic, and was so turned off by the Catholic cover-up of horrible Catholic misbehavior that he became Orthodox with a capital O. And a lot of young people are becoming Orthodox with the capital O. It seems to be attractive, partly because there was never any Reformation in Orthodoxy. So you have an ancient church that hasn't been contaminated by the Reformation. Anyway, what do I want to say here? He believes that it's going to get heavier, and the cultural soft totalitarianism is going to be political, and that's going to be the next stage. It won't be soft. And he believes that, like the Chinese, there's going to be a social credit system. That now with sophistication with computers, they can keep track of each one of us, where we visit, where we go on our computers, and create a profile of whether trustworthy citizens or not. I think that's pretty far-fetched, but he thinks that's a real danger. Well, I mentioned here the danger of legal coercion, the importance of the Supreme Court decision, which the Missouri Synod pushed, called Hosanna Tabor Lutheran. And it was 2010, John Roberts did the decision of the Supreme Court, in which it guaranteed that a pervasively religious institution like a Missouri Synod school could hire and fire according to its own criteria, not extra criteria brought in by the government or civil criteria. So the Missouri Synod school fired somebody who no longer kept up with the conviction you make when you sign on as a Missouri Synod teacher, and she sued them, and it went through the courts, and the Supreme Court said no, religious institutions could fire and hire by their own criteria. Now that's extremely important, it seems to me, because now groups that are kind of defending religious freedom are having some real gains, and that's not the only constitutional thing, but that's one that comes to mind. And I give money every month to the Alliance for the Defense of Freedom, ADF. They're worldwide. They have lawyers that defend people who have been pressed by suits or whatever against their religious convictions. Two of them I mentioned from this week in the paper, in the Roanoke Crimes. And one of them, did you read about this? A guy that got fired from a Richmond school because he would not use the pronouns that students do. And the school fired him, and he sued. He got $575,000. Now that's excessive. Everything seems to be excessive, these suits these days. But he won, ADF won the case for him, so he had to be reinstated. I don't know if he wants to go back to that school. By the way, as a professor, I already, way back when I was still teaching in college, had a scheme for what I would do. And that was to call them by their last names. And if they want to change their last name, I'll go with that. But that was the University of Chicago style. You were never a first name. You were Mr. or Mrs. This guy did. Is that what that guy did? Okay. Well, the other one was really interesting. Liberty University was in the paper where they, let's see, what was the case exactly? Oh, yes. This is really difficult, because one of their people in information technology was doing their job very well, a man called Jonathan, and he began transitioning toward a woman. And still doing his job well, but transitioning to a woman, and Liberty fired him because it was a violation of their Christian anthropology that you can't change the gift of sex that the Lord gave you. Well, he sued, of course, but ADF won on his count. So that, wait a minute, no, it's not completed. It's not complete.
Because Liberty asked that the suit be dismissed, and as I understand, that's where it is now.
Yeah, so it's still in litigation. But it was a tough one, because what would you do? As Christians, we do recognize a genuine disease called dysphoria, right? And if you're compassionate to somebody, would you accept that? But of course, there's a big movement now where people catch the disease, as it were, transgenderism, and are got caught up in it. So it's kind of a hard judgment of what you would do in that case. So it's no easy one, I think, even from a Christian point of view. But I respect the Liberty judgment. They have the guts to say, well, you denied our Christian anthropology, and we don't want you to work at our school anymore. So those were two really interesting cases. ADF, by the way, defended the Finnish pastor, woman pastor in the parliament in Finland, who read from the Bible that denial of the denunciation of homosexuality of St. Paul. She read that in public, and she was not only cast out of parliament, but jailed. And ADF defended her and they freed her and put her back into parliament. So anyway, that's a really good organization, but it shows how we can be under great pressure to conform to the DIE ideology. I shouldn't say this, but I will. The ELCA had one of their infamous youth gatherings in Houston, or no, it was in New Orleans a couple months ago. The first one's absolutely outrageous. I can't go into that in detail, but it was awful. Where they had a young guy who was transitioning, and he lectured 31,000 kids that he was given the wrong body. The Lord told him he was a girl.
Oh.
And 31,000 kids. And there was a pastor's wife who was the mother of this transgender kid, who then makes a statement also for transgenderism. 31,000 kids. Well, this time it was 15,000. One game. But two main speakers. One was the young man who was transitioning, who's now an adult, claiming again his transgender transition was great, it was God approved, and that's what he commended to anybody who had this sense that they were in the wrong body. And another transgender person, two transgender person talked to the 15,000. There wasn't any, only Jesus was mentioned once, and who Jesus calls us to disrupt the current society we're living in. And the bishop of the church, Elizabeth Eaton, her first speech calls for all 15,000 to disrupt the oppressive system we're in.
The next meeting will be 7.
Wow. All of that to the youth. So, I mean, it's in a lot of places, this cultural Marxism, and now, I don't want to overdo it, but
You can't
how
overdo
far
it.
along the way are we?
Hey, Bob,
Is the game,
Bob,
you can't overdo it. This stuff is so evil, and it's so ingrained in our society. 2 years ago, I wanted to get this flag that says, I'm a great company to work at. And I spent $1,500 to get the application, and it was about 10 pages of questions, very personal, I called the guy up and I said, there is no way I'm going to ask my employees to answer this questionnaire. I'm offended by it. And he said, oh, well, that's what it takes to work at a great company. And I said, I'm a great company and I don't need your little flag.
When we applied to get our flu shots at CVS, we had to fill out this form, and it said, what gender were you assigned at birth? So I didn't fill it out, and at the end it says, do you have any feedback? So I wrote this whole tome criticizing. I said, that's the most foolish statement of the 21st century, what you were assigned at birth. Anyway, so I was fighting CVS.
It's interesting that, especially in Europe, but at places in the United States too, that this extreme separation of church and state is being put in place, except for it's only being done for Christians.
Yes.
In localities, in Europe especially, but also in cities like Minneapolis, the Islamic religion is being allowed to instill most of, or as much as they can, of their Sharia law without pushback. So this idea
selective.
Yeah.
And they execute their kids.
Yeah, the
Especially in Europe, especially.
Right.
The Muslims are given a lot of leeway evidently, but the working class whites really, they come down hard on them. In England, at least that's right.
I'm just wondering if it's the enemy of your enemy is your friend.
Yeah.
Thing.
Right.
We'll get rid of the Christians and then we'll work on the other.
Christians and Jews, Ted. Christians and Jews.
Right.
That, since the Bud Light fiasco,
Oh,
that, we're starting to see major corporations,
step back.
distance themselves from the DIA, particularly the Human Rights Campaign. I can think of, John Deere and Home Depot.
Tractor Supply.
Toyota did this week.
Yeah, Toyota.
Most of the companies that were implementing it were implementing it just because they felt it was a good business.
Right.
They were afraid of this list that was being created. Right, and when they figured out, well, maybe not.
It's not good business to alienate 50% of your customer base.
Yeah, they didn't think all the way through. They just saw this list that they were a good one or a bad one.
Well, at the very end of my handout on the other side of the page, I reiterate Grayer's rather gruesome notion that this is going to be hard totalitarianism. I quote one of my favorite writers, Peggy Noonan, who writes in the Wall Street Journal every Saturday. She says, "Is this terribly overwrought?" Peggy Noonan talks about a coming resistance, the resilience of common sense of folks in America, and maybe a religious revival. So maybe we're not in as bad as a condition as we think. There's a good deal of resistance going on, and it seems to me that it's very important that we have Orthodox churches that continue to form people to stand up. Very important for the next generation of people to be able to resist at least what's being pushed at us. Well, let's see, where am I? I wanted to say that even though there's all this pressure to shut down public expression of religiously grounded values in public and in politics, they really can't pull it off because it's constitutionally guaranteed. And thank the Lord for those Catholics on the Supreme Court who guard very carefully religious freedom, and they make those statements. They make some protections that are extreme, and of course they're being hounded by various people to stack the Supreme Court or regulate them more. So that's constitutionally protected. It's historically a part of American history. We're not going to stop religious groups from being activists. It would take a real totalitarian system to stop that. And it, what's the third thing? Demanded by serious religion, I'm sorry. That is, if we're serious Christians, as Pastor Phil preached this morning, we exercise our Christian life in the world. You don't just stop privately, but you exercise it in our callings. And one of our callings is citizenship, right? So we have to exercise our Christian convictions and values in our citizenship. So I think on those three grounds, I don't think they're going to win. I really don't think. And I think there's going to be resistance, and maybe I pray every night there's going to be a religious revival in America where the Judeo-Christian culture will be given new roots and new vitality from the bottom up, as it were. So, but yet the game seems to be totally different than it was earlier. The transforming Christianity that we talked about in the first session, which Richard Niebuhr thought was the most important strand in American life, the Reformed shaped, Reformed generated, Reformed tradition generated mainline churches that were so influential politically, they've all accommodated the Christ of culture. They've moved over, accommodated the sexual revolution, they've accommodated the settler colonial ideology, so they no longer send missionaries abroad. They dialogue with the world religions, they don't missionize them. So once they've become acclimated to the Christ of culture, where is transformative Christianity. Well, evangelicals, maybe so, maybe Orthodox churches, certainly the Catholic Church is not a dead system. The Catholics have their own problems with the Pope. That thankfully is the age that I am. I won't be around too much longer. Gallows humor. Anyway, there's a good chance, it seems like, that there can be a renewal and revitalization of American religion of life. I don't think I have the time to do the other one. What is the schedule, gentlemen? Do you want to get going over here, or?
When you're done.
Yeah, when you're done. You've got some ready.
Bob, no one wants to shut you down. You just.
Well, are we going on, let's go, let's take on the other side of the
Let's take the
table,
other
because this
side.
is the other side, to keep religion free of dangerous politics. And of course, the most obvious one are the classic sectarian groups, we talked about them earlier, the older Amish, and there's a whole continuum that comes to the Church of the Brethren, which is pretty accommodated to America. But we have the old order German Baptists here, right, the Jameson Orchard. They're not fully accommodated. I doubt if their people, their kids go into the armed forces, and I doubt if they're politically involved. They may be, but I doubt it. Old order Amish, their young men don't go into the service, obviously, and they don't participate in politics. So that's the classical one. You don't want politics to